Blair is the Principal Strategic Advisor at Waikato Regional Council. In 2024, he started the update of the Waikato Regional Energy Strategy ahead of the National Energy Strategy. It's a desktop exercise to establish an evidence base from which to review the strategy and input into the work, supported by Concept Consulting, a very, very credible organization. So today, Blair is going to present to us the latest finding and the potential opportunities of geothermal for Waikato region energy transition. Over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me online? Is that appropriate? Distance?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, that's cool. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Kenny. I'm delighted to be able to come here and speak to your annual general meeting of the association on the regional energy strategy. Compared to some of you here, I'm a relative newcomer to the geothermal resource and work. I started about the start of this century, so it's about 25 years that I've been involved, and it started with the review of our regional policy for the access to the resource. And we learned quite a bit from that, and if I just carry through while I get myself organised, this one here, there we go. I guess many of you will be wondering, what's a regional council doing within working in an energy, with an energy strategy? We learned a lot from working on the Geothermal Policy Review 2003 to 2006 under the RMA, and we thought we can do better with the management of other resources, access to other resources that contained energy, and also the integration of land use to that as well. And as we've gone on, we've recognised that regional economic imperatives also depend on energy, and so that's the reason we're doing it. And I'd just like to go through that as we go through. We started with a strategy in 2009, and we're reviewing that. I'll get on to that. We also looked at the evidence base, how things have changed over time, and how does that fit into the national situation. So that's really what I want to talk about today. So the history of our policy review, we got some really good feedback and credit from that, from the World Energy Globe in 2008, and the citation for that process was up against bricks and mortar projects, you know, really big, expensive infrastructure, and the citation was, this was the soft infrastructure that allows other infrastructure to proceed. And so we got some really good recognition for that as a policy piece of work in 2008. We embedded those learnings into the review of our regional policy statement in 2010-11, and what that did was it allowed us to recognise the relationship between not just the resources that we had access, we had the function of permitting, granting access to, but also those resources containing renewable, the technology that is used to capture renewable resources such as wind and sunlight that are not consentable under the RMA, but are regulated on the effects of the technology used, the effects of land use, which is a district council function. And I'll stick with regional council and district at the moment, even though we're going through a law replacement now. So we built on that existing strategy where we put that together and recognised that things have changed. The imperative then was peak oil. Solar panels just weren't covered. This was only in 2009 because the cost was prohibitive. Battery storage was not even a thing in those days. And EVs were on the horizon. I mean, they were having competitions in the middle of Australia of bicycles with solar panels on them, trying to get as far as they could at 10 k's an hour. Tesla was repowering lotuses in those days. So that's where we were. But just to recognise that we have very few levers when it comes to energy, but we have heaps of interest in it. And on the supply side, we do have some levers with respect to access to some resources. And on the demand side, it has a regional economic process. So what did we do? We started with an inventory, and when we started this, we understood that the incoming government would continue what the previous government had promised, and that was a national energy strategy. We wanted to be in a good position to have a Waikato-wide understanding and confidence in the energy scene so that we could partner with others, interested parties, and have a Waikato position in relation to where the nation's energy future would be. Well, we know now, and it's only just become apparent officially last week, I think, to select committees or inquiries that was one of the ministers said the government is not going to continue with a national energy strategy. We've known this for over a year from officials, and so what we've basically said is, in the absence of national leadership, we will continue and we will configure this so that we can partner with others, collaborate, and make recommendations. And just to build on what you're saying, your association is doing for basically advocacy, not just to the governing parliament parties, but also opposition parties as well, because this is a long-term thing. So that's our imperative. That's why we're doing it. Our council has a strategic direction. Our last council for a transition to a low emissions economy. And this is also in our climate action roadmap, the energy and industry pathway. And we recognise that we have to deal with that in the three elements of the energy trilemma. Make energy affordable, it's got to be secure and sustainable. And the way we're looking at the sustainability element, that's taken care of if we deal with renewables. So we first thought, well, what do we know about the energy situation? And this is the outcome of that desktop study and inventory of where the resources containing energy in the region are. What's the existing use of those resources? Is it, are they used directly, or is electricity generated from that? Making very clear, oh gosh, we had some quite interesting conversations to start with, particularly with people we thought would know better, the difference between electricity and energy. Electricity being a carrier, just-in-time carrier. So the transmission elements needed to be picked up as well, but there's other carriers as well. And we looked at what the opportunities were and where the gaps were. So that was done in 2004, and it was contemporaneous with ECA's RETA review. And so what we decided, not to bother industry that was using fossil fuels and talk to them, we would leave that to ECA. And so we made a big carve out, and with the strategy, we're bringing our inventory together with our understanding of the RETA report to that. So that's why it's a complementary report, and it's separate from our inventory. What we have done is looked at this, and we found this a really valuable diagram to just introduce the electricity portion of the energy scene. And we've used this to, is this one here a pointer? Yeah, so this came from MB, and it was in the briefing to incoming ministers. And so what we saw was at that stage, and of course I'm guessing that you'll have some thoughts about the advice that was to ministers, but what we can see is hydro into the future and geothermal were considered mature industries. But of course we know there's lots more in geothermal now, don't we? And particularly we have ministerial sort of ambitions in that respect. But the key areas there I want to sort of identify is what the officials briefed the minister on was a larger electricity mix, but also the decline of fossil fuels. And we see things have changed now as well, where we've got the government actively trying to reinvigorate gas. So things have changed even just in the last 2 years. What I thought I'd do is just look at those resources that we do recognise in the region and just who has the responsibility, and this is on the supply side, to for access and permitting access. When you look at marine, hydro and geothermal, they are all directly allocated through the Resource Management Act by the Regional Council. So we have direct levers and we can do something about that, and that's something we can control. We have indirect levers with respect to wind, solar and biofuels because they are land uses. And I mentioned before, not consentable, sunlight, air pressure is not consentable, but it's a land use. The effects of the use of land is a district council function. So we had the ability through our regional policy statement, and this is where I went back, how our learnings from our original work on geothermal resources were able to be translated into district plans with respect to wind, because solar wasn't even on the radar in 2011. Things have changed so much. And so what we did do is we were able to go through it on a regional scale, emulate what we did for geothermal, which was spatial planning by identifying those systems that were appropriate to consider as development systems so that you could configure your projects for those areas, but also recognise that we had systems that were special. They were taonga for their fluid-driven features, which would be extinguished if there was any perturbation of the reservoir. So in that respect, we have protected development, limited development, and ones we just don't know enough about, research systems. And you may know more about those ones, but it's just not in the public domain, so we don't know about it. But with wind, we did have the ability to identify where we did not want wind turbines to be placed, and those were on outstanding natural features and landscapes, ONF&Ls, and they were mapped in our regional policy statement and able to be put into district plans. So that's a bit of learnings from that, how it was transferred onto other resources. This comes from MB as well, and we think of electricity as energy, but actually the energy we use, about 3/4 of it is imported fossil fuels. So that's just a reminder of that. Recognising, of course, I don't want to take up too much of your social time. We've identified the 3 sources of renewable energy that we're focusing on. The tidal currents aren't really that relevant in the Waikato. Our harbours aren't large like the Kaipara. They're not that deep, and we don't have a strait and things like that, like Cook Strait. So that's really not an option. But the bottom 2 are, most of our energy comes from solar that we can access at the moment, and that sort of is manifest in a number of different ways, whether it's rainfall, whether it's our weather basically, and the plants we grow. But also we have geothermal in this region, and you're going to correct me, but I'm saying 70-75% of our known resources are in this particular region. Now, one of the things that, and it's talking to professionals such as yourself, I apologise, probably know this, but certainly one of the things that we recognise about the geothermal resource, it's not as limited in its intermittency as other renewable sources of energy. It's continuous, and we'll see how that plays out in the region very soon. That's supply side. I mentioned before the regional economic development opportunities comes from how energy is used. We need energy for modern life. So what the energy strategy is doing is looking at both sides of the equation and recognising that although we have got some direct opportunity to have an impact, we need to work with others in this. I'm sort of delighted to be able to come here and talk to you about it now. One of the things that the strategy can do in relation to our transition is to use less energy services, for instance, passenger transport, that sort of thing, urban design, spatial planning, more efficiency, LEDs, and also transitioning from fossil fuels to electricity and to renewably derived carriers such as hydrogen, new opportunities there. And that's obviously for the creation and economic development, the creation of new industries, as well as the transition of existing industries and use. One thing we were able to do when we asked Concept Consulting was to look at how energy is used within the region. So what we've got here on the left-hand side is the sources of energy, the types of carriers and what happens to it and how it's used in the sectors, productive sectors of the region and the emissions that come from it. And you'll see from this Sankey diagram that a lot of the energy that comes from the region goes through converted to electricity and then is exported with low emissions. Good story. What we've got an opportunity for here, and you'll see here, this is 2024, geothermal there, right up at the top, the biggest contributor for a resource to the regional energy picture there. But we can look at where the opportunities are. We have a huge amount of fossil fuels brought into the region, both for coal and liquid fuels, and also gas. We know this is reducing, but a lot of the industries rely on gas and rely on fossil fuels for transport. These are the big things that we can change. So that's what we're looking for, to change this over, reduce this, grow this, and obviously if we can grow this, that's even better too. We do think that the hydro is probably mature and there's likelihood for some run-of-river community scale, small scale, but we are getting less rainfall than we used to get. And there's a number of reasons that we think this. And what we're getting is big signals from people we talk to that the 19% inflow from the Tongariro power scheme into Lake Taupo, those consents coming up in 2038, 39. So that's something we have to look at. We're also getting 30% less rainfall in the region than we got in the 1960s. When you partition the region into 10-year tranches, the last 10 years, we got 30% less rainfall than we got in the 1960s. The way we get our rainfall is a lot different too. So that means we're in drought for a lot more of the time than we used to be. So that's quite a big change, and we're actually actively working on a water security strategy at the same time as this. Has a lot of parallels. So that's where we see the opportunities. Grow this, reduce that. This is the Waikato's contribution to the national grid for electricity generation last year. 36% of New Zealand's electricity came from this region, and 68% of that was exported to other parts of the country, primarily Auckland, and they get the benefit of the jobs and things like that. I mentioned the RETA report. And recognising that, what do we use energy for? Three things: heating, lighting, and motive power. Geothermal has that flexibility. It's already hot. So if you want to heat things, you've got it there already. It's brilliant. So the opportunity is to bring industry down here that needs heat. It is also flexible because you can transmit it to other areas where those other services are needed. So that is brilliant. Limitations of the RETA report for us is that ECA did it for each region and they treated each region as an island. We're not an island. We have links to other parts of the country. I mean, if offshore wind is going to take off, we're going to need to work with Taranaki to increase their port. If biomass is to increase, we have a huge biomass resource within the region, but there's also biomass just to the south of the region, right on an electrified rail line that can come and service the rest of the region. There's also discussions now and agreements to look at torrefied wood pellets from Kawerau to Huntly. So there's lots of inter-regional interactions, not to mention the amount of electricity that goes out of the region as well. So that's where we've got to recognise that we're not an island, and the RETA report is a transition report. It doesn't look at new industries such as data centres, such as hydrogen economy and the like. So what we did was we summarised that and put it in a bit of a brochure, and I'll leave some copies here if you're interested. And that identifies the energy situation, the opportunities we've got, the constraints we see, the opportunities to electrify the country's export port with the import port, which is, we call them ports, but they're not really ports anymore. They're wharfs because the land around them is so expensive. They can't afford to do their warehousing and bond stores and logistics and things like that. So all the logistics come in here into Hamilton and Titanium Park, Ruakura, but it's not electrified. There's an opportunity there. There's potentially an opportunity to put an extra tunnel through here or maybe use batteries on the trains. What I would like to just say is we asked Transpower, and the Waikato region doesn't accord with Transpower's planning regions. There's three, don't need a photo, so yeah. There's three planning regions that form the Waikato region. So what we've got is the southern part of the Auckland region, the whole of the Waikato region, and the northern part of the Central North Island region. And so what we did, and they're really accommodating, is they reconfigured their inquiries database. Didn't give us any more information than is publicly available, but put it in the context of our region. And we got a heck of a fright because we knew of 908 megawatts of grid scale solar consents that were in the works. This is because of the drying up of the northern part of the region and a good grid between Whakamaru and Auckland. And what they told us is they had 3.2 gigawatts of inquiries, 29 projects, which, wow, we didn't know, 3 times what we thought. 4.5 gigawatts of offshore wind inquiries. That's going to need some transmission lines into Huntly or into Glenbrook or something like that. They didn't have a lot of information about inquiries about geothermal though. There was only 2 projects, 240 megawatts, but in total, there was 9 gigawatts of inquiries for generation, 3 and 500 megawatts of inquiries for load. So there you go. There's that opportunity. We have heaps of resources in the Waikato region, heaps of inquiries, but to get that benefit, the education, the jobs, the employment, we need to be able to use it or turn it into something that is saleable. So that's really what we're about with respect to this. And so what we're going to do with that is complete a draft to because that's a CEO's KPI, so that's pretty important for us. We've got to complete a draft by April next year, and because we don't have all the levers, we're going to be looking for partnerships and looking for collaborations and making recommendations of showing a pathway of how things could happen, recognizing that there's no plan, this, then that, then that. It's not like building something. There's options and opportunities. So it's a scenario approach using existing technology and understandings. Where could things go? What would be the counterfactual to that? What's going to happen anyway with government settings and with technology costs and things like that? And to be fair, we are on the pathway to a low emissions economy because things are getting cheaper. Eventually that'll happen, but whether it's going to happen fast enough to benefit the region, I'm not sure. So we want to be able to speed things up so that we can get those benefits. And I think I'll probably enough there. If there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Circulate the hard copies, and the hard copies are also online.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll share that link as well with our attendees online. So thank you, Blair. So thank you. So I'll invite Tim to come up and then give the priority one presentation, and then we'll have the joint Q&A together. So I met. So while we are doing the IT. So I'm going to introduce Tim. So Priority One invited me to present at their energy forum earlier this year. So thank you so much. Thank you, Tim and Larissa, for your fantastic work. So Tim is currently leading the Priority One Energy Future report for the Western Bay of Plenty. The report has identified a number of opportunities, including geothermal. So Tim is an award-winning designer. Can you design my house, please? Entrepreneur, innovation leader with a proven track record of building and upscaling impact venture. So you are currently leading the Priority One regional deal and also a number of regional efforts in the last 2 years in transitioning to a low carbon economy. Over to you.
All right. Do we give us one? Yeah, it's making me sound better than I am. Well, maybe I'll just start off. So we started a project for looking at our region's energy stuff a couple of years ago, and that's okay. Yeah, and I mean the goal was really to try and consolidate, Oh, here we go. Good, right. So I'm on here. So we've got a link to all the work that's been done. There's a report and an abstract, which is off that link on the Priority One website.
So you will have to speak actually.
Oh, okay. Yep, sorry. So when we started, our aim was to create a coordinated picture of our energy future across stationary energy, manufacturing, and transport. So, and the goal behind that was to try and drive investment into infrastructure and technology in the region. Our objectives when we started was to establish and deliver a series of industry and government forums and workshops, which we completed in 2024. Leveraging a whole lot of existing information because there's been a lot of reporting done in New Zealand. So the last thing we were looking to do is write another report that had already been done. It was like, the problem is that it's across a very, very wide range of sources. So our goal was just to put it all into one place and make it easy for our region to access. Compiling a regional energy strategy, consult with our businesses, identify the actions that we think can help make progress, and then to deliver that strategy also to central government. So if we think about Tauranga and Western Bay, I'd love to have Blair's slides. I think the Bay of Plenty was some sort of a little small bar on the left-hand side of the chart. We don't produce a lot of energy. We've got quite complex needs because we The region has grown 4.6% compound annual growth rate every year on average for the last 10 years. So, I mean, you've significantly increased the size of the economy. And so that has quite a lot of impacts on our energy systems. We're also a very export-oriented economy. And so, the drive to decarbonise is quite real for us because of our exposure to international markets. And I think, so we're, and this is part of why Priority 1 actually ended up doing the work in the first place, was that we were involved in, I think Blair talked about the regional energy transition. So not sure if everyone knows, but they actually did the Bay of Plenty Plus was the area that we did, which conveniently took in Taupō, Rotorua, Western Bay were all grouped together, and that's mainly because of the forestry and geothermal facets to this particular part of the economy. So the Western Bay was drag-netted into that. We did the NBIE National Energy Strategy, and the focus in our region was on transport and logistics, predictably. And then we also, at the same time, simultaneously, we had Transpower and Powerco doing the major CapEx review for all of our transmission and distribution over the next 30-odd years. And so the problem with all of those things is that they were all separate and they all covered quite different subject matters. And so it was pretty clear that to make a serious impact in this energy space, we'd need to connect all that stuff up. I think Blair talked about the national context. Obviously, I think last year we produced the highest level of renewable electricity since the 80s. So it was like 88%, but obviously the total package that Blair referred to, I mean, when you step back from that, renewables only constitute about 30% of that total when you take into account all the liquid fuels. For our region specifically, we've got very limited generation. So we have 40 megawatt, which is produced by the Kaimai system. That would be mopped up by the port on its own. So we pretty much have one arterial line that comes through from Nongataha called Tarukinga, and that line is about 400 MVA. And so anything happens to that, the region has a somewhat substantial problem. And if anything happens upstream from that, the region has a somewhat substantial problem. So, we are quite exposed. We definitely consume a lot of energy. We don't create it at the moment. Freight and logistics. So some of Tauranga's sort of unusual statistics. Obviously, the Port of Tauranga exports 50% of the total value of New Zealand's export goods. So it's a very big number. And as a result, it has a big impact on our carbon emissions. So it's worth, unlike most regional economies in New Zealand, where agriculture is likely to be the biggest emitter, if you take into account marine freight, we're about 44% of the total is freight and logistics. So also what came out of the RETA, obviously because the North Island has had the benefit of many years of reticulated natural gas, so we've been sucking on the pipe pretty nicely for a long time. Now the pipe's getting a little dry, so that's creating a number of problems for us. And they are reasonably serious problems because obviously the speed at which the decline is happening at a higher speed than what was predicted. The numbers are getting decreased every time they get sort of redone. And, it has an impact on our industrial process sector. If you look at our electricity, so regionally, we're predicted to go from 300 megawatt to 500 megawatt peak. And our total energy demand, again, close to doubling over the sort of 30-year period. So this is from the Transpower and Powerco work. New Zealand's also signed up to the legally binding Paris Agreement, which, obviously politically at the moment, people are playing sort of footsack with that. However, our region has a general view that we'll have to deal with it regardless of what the political climate is in New Zealand. You've obviously got things like the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which are designed to target countries that have a lower level of regulatory framework than, say, for instance, Europe does. So CBAM will level up the playing field if you don't have the same regulatory framework. So as a region, definitely there's a big perspective that from an exporter standpoint that we'll have to deal with it one way or the other. And again, primary sectors will be affected by this. So with our energy forums, I think Mark actually participated in one of these, or maybe more than one. They were really facilitated forums attended by businesses within the region to create a clear picture. So we did manufacturers, processors, then we did transport and logistics, and then we did planners and the development sector, because obviously at the moment, one of the problems we have as a fast growing area is that, there's quite clear problems with how electricity is provided. Like quite often Powerco will, nobody obviously wants a substation next to their house, but there has to be one there in these growth areas. So it gets shunted to when they have to run around very, very late in the piece to try and kind of get it all together and to wing it. Whereas obviously, there needs to be a much more consolidated view as to how we do that. All the businesses, this is probably the number one thing, uncertainty. So technical, economic and political. And on the technology side, it's very, very difficult for companies to commit to semi-proven or unproven or partly and not fully adopted technologies that haven't become mainstream, because are you backing the right horse? There's some serious financial consequences if you don't get it right. So what that has led to, from what a lot of businesses have said, is basically they'll just sit on the fence. It's easier actually to do nothing than to do something at the moment. There's a high level of interdependence. So between, a lot of the opportunities for transition. Good examples would be, there's competition for the biomass resource. Sustainable aviation fuel could probably mop up all the residue reserve in the greater Bay of Plenty Plus area. But at the same time, you've got companies, looking at torrefied wood pellets, $300 million plant going out at Kawerau. Then you've also got things like you want to do green methanol for shipping. You have to use biogenic CO2. You can't use industrial output waste. So, those create some real competitive constraints there. But also there's also some stuff that is potentially mutually beneficial. I'd say geothermal is definitely one of them. As a region, we don't report anything apart from what you can pull out that gets reported through the likes of the RETA and or Transpower. So a lot of the data was actually, that I've used, was actually sort of scraped from climate studies that have been done, because they are completely across the board. And Oricon gave me their full data set, and they data quality rated all the underlying materials. So it was useful to get that. You can certainly see some of the discrepancies between the RETA report, which is above 500 kilowatt for off-grid, industrial process heat, and then the other stuff, because this one is agnostic, so it just has everything, so you can see the delta between the numbers. Decarbonisation for our region, as I said in report, it's viewed as a significant regional threat. So we have to really be fairly aggressive in the approach that we take to it because of the export exposure. A lot of the businesses said, there's a real need for collaboration and coordination. Many of the businesses at the moment are probably trying to tackle the problem individually. So part of what we're trying to do is, again, trying to solve these problems collectively rather than individually. So what were we trying to seek to address? So this probably just wraps back over what I was saying. We don't have a coordinated strategy or reporting, so we don't really know our current and future state. We're pretty reliant on that single significant line of energy supply into the region. And being involved on the economic development side is kind of funny because, I said to Transfer, well, what's the resilience risk associated with Tarakinga? And they said, oh no, we've done all the work, it's all good. The following Tuesday, I was in a meeting with Rotora's EDA, and one of the projects that they're putting forward for the Regional Infrastructure Fund was a flood resilience project in Nongataha, and I asked them why. And he said, well, because we had a number of floods go through there. I was like, oh, yeah, well, that's good to know. So, and also our manufacturers are reliant on natural gas. So we've got to transition that away, not specifically to decarbonise, but just to try and, jobs, that type of thing. I mean, we need sustainable energy supply for the region to work. We are a freight logistic hub, so that's a real challenge. Certainly in our region, we have a bit of a problem around consenting. I think the classic one was Haringa consented a hydrogen fuel station, one of the 4 ones at the moment on the arterial network. And in Waikato, I think it took 2 months. In our region, it took 2 years, and it's exactly the same station, completely modular. So that was a bit of a damning statistic. And uncertainty we've talked about. So our vision, which has actually been quite triggering for some of our companies. So we have a few energy companies that are quite big, but don't actually produce a lot in our region. So they have a kind of an interesting relationship with our region, which at times is, I would say, unhelpful because of the fact they don't really have a lot of economic exposure in our space. So we said we want to be energy self-sufficient and we want to be a net exporter. And I think when we published this report, I think Transpower came for a meeting the following week because they read that statement and had a bit of a freak out about it. And the point for us is that we're setting a deliberately aspirational goal. It might not be possible, but at least it will stimulate action to be able to try and achieve a meaningful change. And also, I guess, leading the way in low carbon transport and industrial innovation is that there's a lot of technology that sits in a proven but not fully commercialised state when it comes to freight and logistics. So it needs help to move into that kind of more commercial space. And even when you look at things like hydrogen for us, I mean, one station does at the moment 15 vehicles a day. We have a system that does 990,000 vehicle kilometres a day. And so, there's just such a gap between what they've got and what we would need if we want to transition systems away that it definitely requires a different approach. So how, I guess, we want to achieve that is by strategic and collaborative planning, adoption of innovation technology, policy and financial support, learning from others. So there's lots of other regions that are doing cool stuff. And we want to kind of learn from what they're doing, and community and stakeholder engagement. And we want to increase the awareness and acceptance. So to say that our political leaders and our industrial commercial leaders really see this as a significant issue is not the case, I don't think. It's sort of one of those things that, people can go home, use the microwave, fridge working, that's not a problem. So it won't be a problem until it is a problem, and then it will be a pretty substantial problem. We have to drive support from business. So business really has to own the agenda for this. They're the ones that are going to have to drive it. We have to create momentum within the program and network with other regions. So I'll just go through. So the regional opportunities for us, biomass, biogas, geoheat and hydrogen are probably kind of some of the ones that really strike out. And if we specifically get to the geothermal stuff, so I think possibly some people in the room may have been involved in this work, but Tauranga geothermal system is a system that's not really widely known, even in our region. It's like you get the occasional person who has a heated swimming pool. I think there was one guy that won lotto, a friend of mine bought his house, and he was replacing the entire contents of the swimming pool daily through his. He doesn't do that anymore, but that was through courtesy of the system. Pretty big. Classified as a groundwater system warmed by underlying geothermal influences. So what you have is someone will have a water take consent, and they might be pulling it at 30 to 60 degrees and having to cool it down before they use it for their consent. So it's pretty interesting. Ranges between 15 and 70 degrees. That picture was supposed to be what people use it for, which is mainly swimming pools, not all the stuff. This is sort of gives you an idea. This is the Mount Maunganui, this is Tauranga, that's sort of the eastern parts of Tauranga, Makatu. And so this is a temperature map, and you can see, I think, the temperatures naturally follow the colour spectrum. There's quite a lot of, there's a very big industrial area here, very big industrial area there, very big industrial area out here. So at the moment, based on the initial work that's been done and reported by GeoExchange for the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, it maps pretty well with this. So this is our connected centres concept, urban form and transport initiative. This is our spatial plan for the growth regions of our Western Bay area. And so in the east, there's a lot of development. In the west, there's a lot of development. And in the north, there's a lot of development. And so there's quite a lot of correlation between the work that's been done and what we've looked at. And I guess our perspective is that, 70% of residential power bills are for heating. And if we're a massive net exporter or a net importer of energy, that's not a bad place to be looking. Many of the industrial applications, there's lots of stuff in our industrial areas may not require super high heat, it's only moderate. So geothermal is quite good. Could use a ground source heat pump to push it up if they need to, up to 100, 160. Also, we've got to be strategic. We have a lot of relationships, and there's a lot of forestry business and industrial e-commerce that's done, through kawerau to us. It's a very symbiotic relationship. And so clearly, if you want to do 200 degrees C, we should be putting those businesses in kawerau, not in Mount Wanganui or Rangiuru or in Tauriko. So, yeah, I think that's it. So, yeah, we see a lot of potential in it. I think there's a lot of work to do on breaking the initial ground so that people feel more confident that it's going to work. I think what a lot of businesses are worried about is drilling and then coming up with nothing. So there's certainly potential, given the density of some of the industrial areas and the geospatial plan, to do district schemes. That seems like a pretty sensible approach for us, but obviously probably does need a utility involved to help, do it at a utility and district scale. I think that's it. Oh, next steps. So what we've done is we held an energy summit. So we completed that. Kenny very helpfully came and did a wonderful presentation there. We have already formed our energy leadership group. So this is drawn from a lot of significant industries, but we've been pretty strategic about even down to which companies. So it's a pretty curated group that can actually get things done. So they've already met. We've met twice. We have Martin Atkins from the Waikato University's NG group. He's part of that. So he's very luckily won lotto from our last meeting, and one of his students is probably going to be doing some modelling about what some of the alternative kind of pathways and futures might be. And the business transition and resilience bit is specifically targeting some of the technology that's coming up, bringing those people into the region, getting our businesses to be able to sit down and talk quite specifically and in detail with some of those people about how some of these technologies are being applied. So that'll occur over, probably the next year. So we've actually made quite a lot of headway since the report was published in August, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. So may I please invite Blair to come up to the stage again? So we're going to have a bit of Q&A. This is ad hoc, as you know. Okay. So first of all, are there any questions on the floor and also online? And please mention your name so that we can catch. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My name's David Brown. I work for Western Energy. Before that, I was working for Shell for about 30 years. I was involved in hydrogen projects, renewable projects, obviously oil and gas projects. And like you, I believe that New Zealand has huge potential. That was one of the reasons I came here. But I would implore you, after hearing what you're talking about, I would implore you from the bottom of my heart to learn from what's happening in Europe. Please. The UK has the highest electricity costs in the world because of a too rapid drive towards transitioning off fossil fuels. And we are now in a state of fuel poverty. We are in a state of not being able to run primary industries. 3 out of 5 refineries have shut in a year. Primary industries can't afford the fuel. These tend to be owned by multinationals. Multinationals, by definition, manage their portfolio and they shut down things. And they shut down in the UK. I heard the gentleman talk about planning. We saw exactly the same. You will overload your planning system with aspirational energy projects. Those then get fed into the national grid to say we need X amount more gigawatts power. The national grid come up with huge costs for upgrading the power system, and the whole thing log jams. The cost of upgrading the UK's electricity system is over $100 billion, and that all gets passed on to the consumer. So what I would say to you is please, please, please try and learn from some of the lessons learned and the very, very painful lessons learned in Europe about trying to transition away from hydrocarbons. Yes, so I'd welcome any questions about especially, how you're going to get your primary industry. So I think the last question we'd ask is, before we get into it, is who's paying for all this? Who's going to pay? The consumer? And what incentives does business have to transition from a fuel that they know the cost of to a fuel that's going to cost more? Where's that balance? Where's that incentive for business to do this? So, but I would like to end. I think New Zealand's a fantastic country. I think it's got huge, huge potential in geothermal, especially. But what I would say is please learn from other countries. Thank you.
Any thoughts of?
Thank you. Thank you. It's always good to get a different perspective. One of the things that we recognize is that a strategy needs to develop is the use and the supply of, if you're going to electrify or use another energy carrier, needs to happen at the same time. You can't just overload and overproduce, because it's going to be a waste then, and it's going to and that's not going to work. So yes, understand what you're saying there. Just invite you to consider the situation that we could be in, though, in that we are totally reliant on international circumstances for fossil fuels as gas runs out in the country. So unless we just use indigenous coal, there's an issue there of certainty, security of supply for that 75% of the economy that runs on imported fossil fuels. So that's an issue there. So it's global geopolitics and potential price rises, potential supply issues. So that's a thing. We did a bit of a back of the envelope calculation that New Zealand last year spent all its export earnings from its entire fisheries sector and sheep sector and beef sector buying fossil fuels just to get to and from work, to the beach, and our products to market. So that's $12–13 billion that we could use every year on nation building. So it's a transition that I understand it's got to happen in sync rather than asymmetrically, because that would be a problem. But that's all I've got to offer at this stage. But I'm really, if you got some more information, I think a field trip's on.
So we can talk offline. I really want this to succeed. What I would say, don't drive a country
Well, I mean, obviously we're not politicians and we don't make the policy, so we just have to sort of eat the club sandwich that they make down in Wellington. I mean, obviously, I absolutely agree with you that, I mean, what has been done, what they didn't do is consider the material dependence of the applied manufacturing sector, and I come out of a manufacturing background, on reticulated natural gas, and there wasn't enough thought provided into managing a transition. I mean, one of the things with our group that we're pretty clear on is that that part of it is about cost-effective supply, and you sort of have to work on a number of options over time. You know, some are absolutely carbon positive, others are marginally negative, others are less than marginally negative, but they're still improvements on what occurs today. So I think the risk is chasing perfection is the problem, whereas you've got to make empirical, rational decisions that are based on good information. So I agree with a fair amount of what you're saying there, and obviously we do have the advantage of a good system, but equally, you know, things like even what they've done with Marsden doesn't make a lot of sense, because obviously it decreases our it increases our material dependence on other more highly refined products, and it has caused some problems in New Zealand already. And again, another example, along with gas stuff, wasn't really thought through properly. And you know, we can definitely get to a point where we're in a much stronger position and have decarbonised a lot of areas. I think the non-transmission solutions, of which geothermal is one of them, is particularly important for us, because again, you know, we've got, I don't know, I mean, we have one private developer putting in 40 megawatts of solar on Matakana Island with a direct line through the harbour back to the port. You know, those are the sorts of things, one of those, and then another something over here, all independently funded and financed, not government dependent. I mean, a lot of what we're trying to do is just actually take control of our own destiny and not simply just be given a transmission plan and expect to suck it up.
Anyone online? Okay.
Hi,
Matt?
Kenny.
Coda.
Here, Kenny. Couple of questions here, if you don't mind.
Oh, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This
Maybe
is Chris
summarize
with,
into one.
okay. This is Chris here with Propel Works. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was very informative. First
Thank you.
question to Blair. When you say the regional council levers are quite limited, what is the biggest lever that you would like to have that would move the needle the most? The second question is to Tim. Tim, you said that the energy self-sufficiency is pretty aspirational for Bay of Plenty. If that's the case, then could you please share some thoughts on what is realistic to achieve? Is it 50% energy generation by certain time, or more than that, or less than that? Because aspiration is one thing, realism is another. I'm just keen to know what is actually realistic considering where Bay of Plenty is right now and where it can be in the near future. Thank you.
Right. From what I understand, you're requesting my thoughts on what would be the biggest lever that we could use, and I think we don't have an economic development agency in the Waikato. It is run from the Regional Council, and it has just started. That facility has just started. That I have really big hopes for, and I think it has heaps of potential, because what that has got the opportunity to do is galvanise the economic sectors within the region, and its collective messaging will be a lever. Now that's soft power. That's through the work we do under the Local Government Act. It's not something we do as a delegated function from central government under the Resource Management Act. So I think that's one of the bright opportunities we have, and certainly the relationship we have developed and are fostering with iwi of the region as economic development entities, and also their understanding and relationship to resources, natural resources. I think those are the two levers that are going to be the promising ones into the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to answer that question, I mean, personally, I think that we can do it, but there's a lot of pessimists out there. I think what probably, if you were going to get there, I mean, I think being able to get to a point where if something did happen to that primary supply line, that the region still works, that would be a fantastic outcome. I think that there's certainly going to be areas that are going to be difficult. So obviously with the liquid fuel stuff, those are really hard to abate. And there's a lot of deep work that's got to be done at a systemic level to make changes, which I still think, you know, they have a compound impact on reducing pollution, improving air quality, all sorts of things. I mean, even within some of our sectors, they do face a bit of a challenge around license to operate in some areas, just simply because of things like air quality. So, yeah, I definitely think that we can do it. But if we could get to a point as an interim target where we could insulate ourselves against sort of what might happen for someone forgetting to tighten a few bolts over lunch.
Okay, so I'm just going to have, sorry. Greg, please.
Yeah, no, just to, well, I could just to expand on the messaging aspect, and thank you, Tim and Blair. You both recognise the importance of geothermal to your respective regions, and I'm an advocate of a good mix of energy resources for resilience. You recognise in geothermal that we are utilising proven technologies. We have good understanding of our resources, and we have a good success rate with drilling. So in terms of the opportunities, however, the messaging of those successes, you know, Blair, on your slide where you had the energy inventory on a page, with regard to opportunities, there was no mention of geothermal. With the constraint section, you highlighted the constraints around wind and reduced rainfall impacting hydro. You know, the perceptions are really important. People hear your words, and I agree with your words, but they're soon forgotten. But people remember the images and the figures. So, you know, on your slide around opportunities and the diminishing impact and of fossil fuels, and over time that will happen. You know, why don't we see, when you advocate for geothermal, why don't we see geothermal being promoted and highlighted as a real opportunity? Because there's a huge potential, not just for power, as Tim's highlighted with the Tauranga region. So what in leveraging, how can we work together to promote geothermal all the more when we're on the same page?
For the development of the strategy, I would absolutely welcome the opportunity to include more of that understanding of what could be with the geothermal resource. I think we're actually working on, and I showed the briefing to incoming ministers, Energy Minister, where MB was saying that the resource was mature. And also looking at Transpower's inquiries for grid connection, there was just 2 projects. We'd be delighted to know what's in the wind, and we will put that in if that was something that was available.
Thank you.